Hi, good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of our Justice and Pieces guest speaker series. So, put my host headphones, I guess, right back on here and ready to go with today's guest, who is from small town paralegal. She is a paralegal out, and her name is Hayley Bettles. And thank you so much, Hayley, here for joining us here on Justice and Pieces. Really happy to have you here with us.
Thank you so much for having me. This is so exciting. So like you said, my name is Hayley Bettles, and I am the sole proprietor of Small Town Paralegal. I run my practice out of my home in Mitchell, Ontario, and then I serve mainly Perth and Huron counties. But as we'll talk about later, there's so many benefits to virtually being a part of COVID that I can serve quite a bit of a bigger area. But that's my kind of main focus area to start with. So I found a love for law in high school in my grade 11 or 12 law class. I was thinking about it earlier and I couldn't remember which grade it was, but I just loved everything about it. And I knew that that's where I wanted to go. So I went to university first for criminology because I thought I wanted to go to law school. Then I got done university and didn't really want to do the full program. So I found the paralegal program, which gives me a little bit of flexibility and less time in school. So I completed that at Fanshawe College. And then I became a paralegal in December of 2018 and then started my firm in June of 2020. So my three areas of practice that I cover are small claims court, landlord tenant board, and provincial offenses. And then I also do notary public and commissioning services. So that's a little bit about me, and I'm sure we'll get into some other questions.
So what was it like, I guess, going right into starting your own practice and coming up with Small Town Paralegal and all of that? What made you say, look, I'm going to go out on my own and I'm ready for this experience and those three subject areas that you're focusing on? I think the lawyers have the monopoly on the word specializing. I think you got to be certified by the law study, but the areas that you focus your practice in on, and how did you pick those?
Yeah, so when I was in school for my paralegal program, I tried really hard to get a placement close to home because I didn't want to drive because I was just driving back and forth to London anyways. And from the start, I realized how hard it was to find a placement because number one, there's not many paralegal firms small town, but also because lawyers don't generally hire paralegals as a paralegal. If you're hiring a paralegal in a law firm, it's generally in more of like a clerk position. So, and they don't cover the areas of law generally that a paralegal covers. So through that, I realized I did get a placement in London and it was great and it taught me a lot, but I realized that if I wanted to practice close to home, that I had to either start my own or try really hard to find into a lawyer's situation. So, excuse me, sorry. I was lucky in my placement because I had 4 paralegals who covered pretty much every area. So I got to look into the SABs and the WSIB, as well as, the small criminal that we can do, the small claims, the landlord tenant, and the POA. And the landlord tenant, the POA, and the small claims are easier to do in the small town feel. And you can cover more areas, whereas the stuff like SABs and WSIB is more of a long-term practice area that you have. It's generally better in the big cities because you're going to get the people that call those big city lawyers. And the firm the paralegal practice that I placement with, they actually got most of their referrals from a big city in Toronto. So to me, the small claims court, landlord tenant, and POA were the 3 that really interested me. And that's where I kind of decided to go with those 3.
And so you touched on this at the very beginning there. So let's maybe get into it right away. COVID, obviously, everyone's in your small town now and you're in everyone's big city. So what's that experience been like for your practice in terms of, certainly one of the big advantages of being in a small town there is that you would get a lot of clients that there wouldn't be much other paralegals there setting up shop, right? Now anyone from anywhere in Ontario could take on a landlord and tenant matter in Mitchell, Ontario if they wanted to, but what is it like now? What has the change there been since March of last year in terms of, certainly you established your practice later than that, but for the entirety of your practice, how have you sort of changed your focus given that this pandemic has gone on a lot longer than maybe anticipated?
So I think I was lucky in that sense, because when I started, it was already the pandemic. So it's not like I had to take my in-person firm and change it to a virtual firm. I got to start as 100% a virtual firm. So I got to start without having to learn. I guess I learned as I went, but I didn't have to change all my old ways. But I find it's very helpful, especially because I think small claims court, landlord tenant, and POA are really moving in positive steps of being virtual. So a POA matter generally before took anywhere, from a year or so to handle from start to finish. And a couple months ago, I did one from the day of the ticket to the guilty plea within 25 days. So it's very nice because you can speed things up, but it's nice because you can also have people from farther away. So I've had clients from 2-3 hours away who found me through online, and we've done an entire matter start to finish without ever having to see each other. I mean, of course, you do the virtual to verify identity and everything like that, but other than that, you can file everything online, which makes things so much nicer.
And do you think, even post-pandemic, what are some of the features there that you really like, that you hope stick around, or are there things that you are yearning to kind of get back to normal that you can do differently than what we've been doing now?
So I think that POA, if it's something that could stay the way that it is now, it is a really nice way of doing things. I think because when I did my placement, it was in London, and you go to a courthouse with tons and tons of people in a day that are all trying to get through. And I mean, that's great if you're self-represented and you're looking to get assistance, but most of the time you're going to represent yourself. And it really streamlines the process and makes things a lot easier for everyone else. Things like the landlord tenant board, I find that it's good to do things online, but there's a very big time delay now because you have to schedule not as many hearings as you normally would. But I think throughout this pandemic, each court is learning and adapting and changing all the time. Like I did a CPD on small claims today, and they said that they're making a big announcement like later on this week about how they're kind of enhancing the small claims court. And it's good to see everyone making steps in the right direction. Definitely saves a lot of time for the client and like a lot of our time, because we would normally be driving to the courthouse and stuff like that, and we're saving a lot of that time, which means we can also take on more cases and stuff like that, and it's not taking up such a backlog.
And you mentioned that just there about finding clients online. So let's certainly talk about your presence there on both social media as well as a digital marketing presence there, an online presence, and maybe you can share kind of establishing that and how that's been helpful for you in your practice, given that you're not going to have foot traffic walking by the firm as much anymore, or some of the even if you were in a hearing and someone's like, hey, I just heard you speaking to that matter, you're a licensed paralegal, maybe you can help me. Like, you're missing out on those kinds of connections you would otherwise have. So maybe stress how your online platforms there have helped you with getting clients.
So I'm very prevalent on Instagram and Facebook. I try my best to, content plan for 6 weeks in batch and make sure that I keep posting. And as much as that's great for, keeping people in the constant know, Google is the big thing. I get 90% of my clients from Google who just search, the simplest things, Stratford Paralegal, or actually found one. I put a post on about the Innkeepers Act, and it was like a fun fact Friday, and she actually found me through that because she was posting or looking for the Innkeepers Act, and I came up. I took a CPD at the beginning of my practice, and it was all about the importance of internet and how putting keywords in your Google really helps bring people to you. And I think that I've really taken that into I do a blog to include as much as I can and on my website. And the more that it can draw people to you and make you the top pick, the better, especially when it's, not so much in the small town, but in the bigger cities where there's, 50 or 60, you want to be able that you can stand out and that you are the one that they want to choose.
And I guess in terms of that, what's the importance there of being able to connect with others? Having your own practice, I think, and I was just talking about this, it's very difficult for being able to just go down the hallway and say, hey, I'm just starting my practice, or I have these first few clients, I have just picked up this other area. Do you have any advice or mentorship for me? What have you found in terms of connecting with others in the field and being able to do that in a pretty much entirely virtual environment these days.
Yeah, so the 4 paralegals I did my placement with are wonderful, and I'll talk to them for questions, but they're in Kitchener and London, so they're not very close and accessible. But another CPD I took last year talked about the importance of a virtual office, and in Toronto and London, you can run your office from home, and then you pay a monthly fee, and you use an office, you use their address, and you take their mail there and everything like that in meeting rooms. So obviously in Mitchell, they don't have that big firm that does that. So I actually reached out to a local lawyer, and I use her office space for meetings, or like there's only so many of us, so she needs something commissioned, I can go into the office, and she's a really great resource to kind of bounce things off of. She covers the small claims areas and not so much the landlord tenant and the POA, but she's helpful with that and all the rules and all the changing and stuff. And even sometimes if I'm just like, hey, does this sound right? Or it's just nice to have someone, even over an email or a phone call, that you can have to bounce questions off of, and you don't feel like you're bothering them, and you feel like you're getting good experience and advice from them.
And maybe you could talk a little bit more about that connection there, because the legal industry, and I think stressing to my students, it's not like you're going to, there are certainly some people who find like a 9-to-5 kind of job as a result of finishing their program, but you're going to have to cobble together, especially if you're going to start your own practice. It's not, I'm just going to do this. You could do a little bit of work, contract work for a lawyer or a paralegal. You can be jumping in different areas and getting different pieces there. You can work part-time. You can do all sorts of things, but maybe you could kind of elaborate there on how you kind of built that connection there, and what's that been like for you in your own practice.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, making those connections are so important. It's also important for, enhancing like your credibility and stuff like that. If you're just someone that starts up and anyone can start up and have a website, but if you don't have references, or if you don't have lawyers or paralegals, referring you and stuff like that, people are still going to hire you, but it's not going to be the same as if you have a lawyer in town. Like, it's nice for us because in small town, there's only a couple of lawyers and I'm the only paralegal. So if I get a client who's calls me looking for wills or something like that, then I can point them towards her or a couple of other ones if they're in a different town. And the same thing for me is, since they are a lawyer, they handle other matters. They don't prefer to do the landlord tenant and the small claims and the POA. They do it because they're already longstanding clients, but they'd rather give it to me in something that I specialize with. And it makes things easier for us. We kind of just bounce off of each other, and it really helps. Like, I had a matter a couple weeks ago, and with the COVID rules, it makes things difficult with the ever-changing rules. So I just needed to, email her and see what my next steps are. You can find so much stuff online, but I find sometimes you just need to talk to someone else and see that you're doing things the right way.
Now, I see a question here about the landlord tenant board. I know some of my students are learning this right now. And they're wondering if, because of COVID, tribunals like the LTB there are very behind in this area. Now, I don't know if it's a little different from some of the places that you are before, compared to places like Peel and Toronto and Durham, but maybe you can touch upon the backlog within the LTB in the areas that you practice in.
Yeah, so I have a couple files that were filed last year, and I kind of have a timeline idea on some of them. Some of them still aren't scheduled, but I know before COVID, when you filed, you had a hearing date within usually 2 weeks to 3 weeks, and the landlord tenant board actually still says that on the website when you file. So I had a client who filed and then called me, I think 3 weeks later, and said, I haven't had a date yet. And I looked into it, and they were like, yeah, we just haven't updated the website. It's still taking a little while. But we had a T2, an L1, and an L2 that were filed between August and September, October of last year. And we've had a case management hearing, which is kind of the new beforehand mediation conversation that you have. We've had one of those for the tenant application in, I think, November. And then the L1 got heard 2 weeks ago. But other than that, it's a very long wait. And something I was very interested in was that, when I apply in Mitchell or Stratford, the hearing is in Stratford. It's in a small area. And when I went onto the hearing, you're on with about 20 other people or 20 other cases or so. And there's people ranging from all over Southwestern Ontario. So they're trying to, it's nice because you can put as many as you can into one. So it was just all L1 applications. So it's definitely putting a backlog, but I think it took the landlord tenant board a little while to figure out how they were going to do the hearings and how they were going to schedule them. And I think now that they've kind of figured that out, they're trying to get the scheduling back up to date.
I'm not sure I understand.
And maybe we can talk a little bit more about the landlord tenant board there. I think a lot of students are interested, obviously, because they're learning about it. What are the kinds of applications that you find? I mean, you mentioned a couple of them there, but perhaps maybe we can talk a bit about what issues you're seeing before the board right now, where people are contacting you, and what's going on with respect. I mean, obviously, you're running into people who may have lost work, and CERT benefits may not be adding up, as well as more people are at home, so their living situations become that much more important than if they were at work half of the day and just coming in to kind of have dinner and going to sleep. So what have you seen, and what's going on for some of your matters?
So definitely the L1 for the non-payment of rent. Now, there is, I don't have it written down, I had it from a hearing, but there's a new section that you need to consider when you're in the hearing. And it's just to make sure that if you were to put an order against them or an evict them, that they're not in a financial hardship because of COVID, right? Like, you have to make sure that that's not a factor and that they're just not paying rent because they're not paying rent. So that's something new that I've seen since COVID's come. But definitely the L1s, and the problem is, it's not really a problem, but they're not really evicting people right now because of COVID. That order was brought at the beginning of COVID. Now, I did see one the other day on the hearing, but I think it has to be pretty extenuating circumstances for them to do that, because it's not like there's other alternatives open to people right now if they end up getting evicted from their house and have nowhere to go. But when I have a client call me, because when you applied before, you would get your hearing heard within 2 to 3 months from when you applied. So if someone owes you 2 months of rent, the most that they could really be back is 5 months or so. Whereas when I have a client call me now, I let them know, it could be a year. And if they're not paying you rent right now, it could be quite a while. So that's just something for them to consider before that they bring that application, to make sure that they really want to go with that avenue.
Yeah, and I think that's probably for a lot of, let's say, not professional landlords, the person that may have an extra rental property, a big concern is, well, what happens? Oh, eventually I'm going to get this hearing before the board, or eventually they're going to evict the person. And what if I never see that money again? I mean, what's going to happen there with respect to being compensated for it? And if at least the board would be able to get them out within a couple of months, that's one thing, losing a few $1,000s. But I mean, if it's going to take over a year, I mean, that's going to cripple me financially. So is there any kind of remedies to speed up the process, or we're just kind of at the mercy of the different boards? I mean, it's not like you could just go home and change the locks, right? I mean, is there anything that a landlord can do if they're in kind of these dire situations other than just wait and hope?
So the landlord, one of my clients, he actually filed before I was retained to try to get the hearing heard quickly. And this was for a non-payment of rent. And there's very specific qualifications in order to have that. And most of the time you won't meet those qualifications. So that's right. You just have to sit and wait. I will tell them, like, if there's a chance that they're going to move out soon, you have a better chance sometimes to wait it out and file with small claims court once they've already moved out than you do to wait for the landlord tenant board. Because if you've already filed in the landlord tenant board, then you have to continue with that avenue. And something I'm learning now, when a when a tenant doesn't pay, you have to go to the small claims court to get that money back anyways with the order. So sometimes it's a little easier to just wait and do the whole thing at the small claims court.
Now, I see a question here, and I think for anyone concerned, especially with COVID, I know you may be immune compromised, or you can have an elderly, or any situation there. But what happens if your landlord now wants to sell? They see the rates there, what's happening, and they think this is the perfect time to cash in, but you're renting and you're stuck because, I mean, you can't find any other place. Do they have to give you notice? How long notice do they have to provide you, and things like that?
Yeah. So yeah, if you're a landlord and you want to sell the house, it's 90 days notice. And as per I want to say 2019, you have to actually give them an additional month's rent when you give them the N12. So like you would have to give them, I'm pretty sure you have to give them back your last month's rent. It's a little confusingly worded, but you also have to give them additional ones. So if they pay $1,000 a month, you have to basically give them back $2,000 to help them find a new place, which is useful when you want them to move out. But the same thing, if they put a file, or if they decide not to move out, or they bring an action against you in the landlord tenant board, you're still waiting to have your matter heard before you can do anything more. So if your house sells in July and you don't get a hearing until November, there's not a whole lot you can do. I mean, that might be an extenuating circumstance where you can apply to have it heard sooner, but you'd still have to plead it pretty well.
And then what about in terms of people saying that's what they're going to do, but really it's just a way to get the tenants hopefully out there so they can now charge 2021 prices to somebody new? Is there any recourse if you find out later on? Because I mean, for a lot of these tenants, if they've been there for 5 years, they're paying way below what they would have to pay if they, even if they found the cheapest place on the market. I mean, I don't know what it's like outside of the GTA, but I'm sure the same. It's not going to be as cheap as it was in 2016. So can they do anything if they find out later on that their landlord just was making up that they were selling the house, or that they had a new tenant, or their son was coming back from school because they don't need to study far away now, they can do it remotely? Can you do anything if it turns out that those were not the real reasons?
Yeah, so the rules for the landlord tenant board is that you should be signing an affidavit swearing that you or someone in your family is moving in for 1 full year after they move out. A lot of times, like if it's just between the landlord tenant and there's no representatives, they don't necessarily do that, but the rules still state it has to be for a full year. So if the tenant finds out that they're either trying to re-rent it at a higher price or that they moved out before the year, then you could file an application with the landlord tenant board, and you would, it's like a math equation, but say you paid $600 at that place and you're paying $1,000 at your new place, you can ask for the difference. So the $400 difference for however many months they either rented it out to someone else where you could be there, and then the landlord tenant board can award that to you.
Perfect. Now maybe to switch a little bit, switch gears a little bit here. I think you just posted about this, and I think came up not too long ago. People were a little surprised, and I think they would be surprised there, that the homeowners own the burden if they're hiring contractors. So maybe you can tell us a little bit more if you're doing some renovations, and can't you just assume that the people that you're paying good money, top money for, are going to take care of making sure everything is up to code?
Yeah. So this is more in respect to like the insurance aspect of things. I mean, I don't know specifically how the burden goes when you get into a hearing and stuff like that, but for the insurance company, if you're doing a renovation and your contractor didn't get an electrical report or an electrical inspection, for example, and your house burns down because improper electrical in that new addition or something, then there's a good chance that the insurance company will probably not cover you because you should have got it inspected by someone that's licensed. Your electrical work should always be done by someone who's licensed, but sometimes, the contractor isn't licensed and they're still doing it, and that's why you should always get an inspection. And you would think that's right, you're paying a contractor to do all this work, that they should be the ones getting the report or getting the inspection, but a lot of the times you find out that that's not the case. And because if a homeowner doesn't know, then that's a couple $1,000s in building permits and other inspections that they're not having to pay for work done.
Now, I did certainly want to touch on that, because it leads kind of back into your posts and on social media there. And I know you had like a contract series as well there that you were sharing a lot about different types of contracts. So perhaps maybe you can tell us a bit more of some of the content. I know you were mentioning having stuff out like 6 weeks in advance. So where do you kind of get those ideas of what to do, and what are some of the things that you focused on? And again, you mentioned that even the Innkeepers Act there that got you a client. So How have you found sort of all of that planning and strategizing and putting everything together on Instagram in particular?
So once every couple of months, when I kind of run out of what to use, I'll Google or I'll Pinterest, business posts or engaging posts, stuff that, you think people want to know. So I had like a list of 50, and it was like, quotes, a day in the life of, motivational things, business tips, all these things that, you want others to know about. And then I tried to relate it to my fields of practice. So like the contract series, I get a lot of questions about contracts and whether we can do them and to what extent. And then I had a recent case with a contract and work being done in a house. So I thought, I'm going to give people some ideas on contracts and let them know just the gist, of basics. And then if they want to know more, they can always reach out to me. So I use like a content planning app. It's called Later. There's a couple of different ones. This one's just free. And I put it in, 3 or 4 times a week, and then it posts right up to my Facebook and Instagram. And that's something that I spend 2 hours every 6 weeks doing, instead of, every other day. You wake up in the morning and you're trying to think off the top of your head what you're going to say, and it sometimes doesn't get as planned out as you want it to. So at least this way, it may take a little bit of work up front, but it's worth it in the end, to get all of that information out while you're thinking of it.
Yeah, that's great advice. I think I often run into that problem there that you just mentioned is, and usually I try to have them like coded to the day of the week. So if I missed like a Wednesday, I'm like, oh, I might as well. And after a couple of days, I'm just like, okay, just wait till next Wednesday and catch up. And I think for the last like almost a month now, I've just been waiting to get back at it. But I think hopefully this weekend I can hammer out some time, like you said, to get it pre-populated, so you don't have to worry about finding that time every day. Because I think it's important that you shared there, because as practitioners, you don't know. I mean, some hearing might be coming up sooner, or you might get a panic call from a client and you don't have that half hour or hour that you thought you would have. And now you find, you're getting out of your routine there. But what about in terms of drawing on some of, I know you mentioned seeing what people are posting about, but do you often find, again, with your branding there, small town paralegal, that people have questions about what it's like practicing in a small town that is unique compared to all the Toronto or maybe the big city sort of practitioners. What is it that's kind of unique to what you're doing that you can share in terms of whether it's on your posts or wherever, that perspective that people don't necessarily always have, especially a lot of my students who may have originally come from small towns, or they may very well be now, because they don't have to be in Toronto to be in class these days. I mean, I've had, I think I even have a student in Quebec because they were, the campus is out of Ottawa there, but things like that where they may want to know is what it's like practicing in a more rural area and being able to share that insight.
So yeah, I think prior to COVID, or especially the old view of everything, is that if you're from the big city, you've got the big city experience and you want to be hired for the matter. And I think it gets forgotten that like we go to school in the big cities as well, or even if it's virtual now, you're still getting the same education as everyone else. It's just that I bring mine back home with me. It is different because you don't have the other help down the hall or something like that to go bounce your ideas off of. But I think there's lots of lawyers and paralegals out there who would love to help you out with questions and all that other stuff. And so I think it's important to just make sure that you show your confidence with your clients and through your social media, and get your knowledge out there as much as you can. Because you can open up in a small town and word of mouth is great, but when something like a pandemic hits, you can't go into stores and talk with all the people like you used to, right? You can still do it, but not nearly as much. So portraying that confidence and knowledge in the law and everything like that online the best you can. It can help everyone else see it. And I ask all of my clients when they're done to leave a review, whether it's on Google or Facebook or wherever they want, because it helps others know that they're happy with their services and that they had a good experience. If you go to a web page or to a Google profile and that lawyer has 0 reviews, then you don't know, either they're new or they just, no one has anything good to say, or that could be the case, right? That's what you think. So the more word of mouth and the more reviews and the more active you can be on places, the more people are going to see your name and the more they're going to think, hey, I got a ticket, I'm going to call her right away and see if she can help me with something. And I think that that's the biggest thing to do, especially with the pandemic and everything, is to make sure that you're as prevalent as possible, and you're their first thought.
Now I see a couple more questions here related to the landlord tenant board, as well as just the renovations thing we were just talking about. So maybe we can go back here. Someone's asking about N12s, which we were talking about, evicting tenants for a relative to move in. Does that happen a lot in that scenario that I touched on? I guess the affidavit kind of limits that from happening as much as possible. I mean, unless you're going to swear a false affidavit and you run a whole list of other trouble there. But do you see that people are using the N12s now and saying, hey, my mom or my dad or my kids are coming back here, or is it something completely different?
I do see it with COVID picking up, because that's the thing. People are living in the big cities and they want to come back home, and their parents have like a rental unit. So they say, hey, I'm going to move in there, right? So I do see it quite a bit. But the thing is that they brought this rule out that you have to wait a year or you get a rent abatement for the tenant, because sometimes it is the matter of they just say that, and someone else moves in and they charge them $300 more a month. So you just have to make sure that if you're doing it for an N12, that you are following all the right rules and that you're making sure that you're going to live in it for the year, or that someone that you swear is going to live there is going to live there for the full year.
And then relating to repairs, what about if you want to do major renovations and you have a tenant in there, and I mean, it's probably not necessarily livable, or it's going to be a big inconvenience. Do you have to wait to do your renovations, or can you have them leave temporarily, or have them leave permanently? What options do you have as a landlord with respect to doing? I mean, in some cases it may be required, right? It may be something like asbestos or something to get out there, or I mean, I'm just throwing out an example, but you may not be able to put it off like putting in new windows. You can always do that a little bit later.
Mm-hmm. So there is an N application. I can't quite remember the number. I think it might be a 14, and that's what it's for. So if you're getting a building permit, which most big renovations need a building permit, or at least should require one. And then it's similar to the same process as the N12. You swear the affidavit that you're getting the renovations done and that they can't live in the house. And I'm not sure about paying them the month's rent, but it might be the same thing. And that's just like the N12. So you serve it to them the 90 days, and then as long as they don't object to it, they should be moving out. Now it's the same thing as the N12. If you say you're getting renovations and you don't do it, and you're just renting it out to someone else, then they have the right to the rent abatement as well.
Perfect. And in terms of doing things now virtually, do you find, I mean, we're having a conversation here on Zoom, do you find, I mean, that being challenging for you in terms of advocacy and talking before the board there, compared to if you have to be in person? Or do you find it's a little easier? I mean, I think they use Microsoft Teams for the landlord tenant board. I don't know if it's different in each area, but do you find that being any of a challenge in terms of getting your points across in an application?
So the landlord tenant board used to use Teams, and the last hearing I had, they did Zoom. So I don't know if they're doing both right now, but every other platform is doing Zoom, which is nice because you don't have to learn a couple of different ways. But I prefer it that way. I actually prefer the POA over the phone. Not that going in person, there's nothing wrong with it, but I don't know, you don't have 50 people standing behind you watching you, and not that you get nervous, but it adds to that level of pressure. Whereas when you're on the Zoom and you're on the phone call and stuff like that, it's just you and your thoughts, and you don't have to worry about any other distractions. And I think it makes you more focused when you're like presenting everything.
And you mentioned the case conferences and mediation, and how is that different than, I mean, normally you would come in for a matter and maybe before you'd go ahead with the hearing, they'd have you, ask your client and the opposing party if they were self-represented, if both parties wanted to try mediation out, you go to a different room and maybe you'd reach a resolution, especially if it's like a non-payment of rent situation about maybe a payment plan or what have you. Are you finding it harder to do mediation virtually through like this case conference type of scenario, or are you finding it's more effective in getting things resolved than going to hearings later on?
So the case management hearing that we were in, the mediator didn't have her video on, and I find it's hard when half of you have your video on and half of you don't. You feel like you're almost speaking to a wall. It's hard to personalize someone when you can't see them. So, and I don't know if it was what it was, but I found it not very like effective because it was the first time we talked about the hearing with the client, because it was not long after with the tenant, it was not long after the application. So it could have been many reasons why it just wasn't working for us, but I found that personability was gone. But then in the hearing, you kind of go into a waiting room before you go into your hearing, and you have a mediator there, and you have duty count, like the free legal advice there. So it's still the same as the regular hearing. You have the chance for the tenants to speak to that free duty counsel, and then you have the chance for both of you to go to mediation, and you actually just go into a separate room away from everyone. We didn't end up doing the mediation, so I don't know how it would look differently as in person, but I think the mediator was in, you could see him. So I think being able to see someone makes a huge difference in just speaking to the matter and the likelihood to want to, resolve it for all parties.
And what about any technical issues? And I was just watching a funny video today about someone who had, I guess their roommate or whomever, family member, renamed their name on Zoom. Every time I log in, I always check. Sometimes it says counsel or whatever because of, if I'm in court for whatever reason, but pretty inappropriate name, and the judge kind of called him out on it. But have you had any, cat filters or anything like that? Have you seen any comedy of errors there in virtual court? I feel nobody knows how to mute or unmute every single time. But what has that experience been like compared to in person?
Yeah, so they're a lot more understanding, because in the landlord-tenant board especially, you can call in and if you don't have access to like a computer with a video camera. But I find that a lot people get dropped off. So like you're in the middle of the call and I don't know if your internet fails or something happens, but you end up losing them, and they're so understanding. They'll just go on to the next matter and bring you back in. I was actually on one, and the tenant got lost somewhere between the waiting room and the hearing, and they'd already heard the matter, and someone called the lawyer back in, and they got to have the hearing just because, like normal, because he had been missed somewhere. So I find that they're being very understanding with it as best as you can. Nothing with the cat backgrounds or the wrong names or anything like that yet. But that would definitely bring some humor to your day.
Now, certainly it's been a journey there for you, and I think, I'm actually going to talk. I'm going to talk to some undergraduate students. I'm on an event there on Sunday, and what was it like doing undergrad and then going to paralegal school? I think, I don't have too many students who do that right away. Maybe they went to undergrad a number of years earlier, and for whatever reason didn't go further, or they weren't maybe interested in law at the time. And then they come back and they're like, well, I don't want to do 3 years of school now that I'm in my 40s or 50s, but I can do a 1 or 2 year program instead. What was that decision like for you? You're doing criminology and then you decide to go to Fanshawe there to do your paralegal studies. Because I think I want to definitely share that perspective to the undergraduate students I'll be talking about is, hey, don't forget about, you can become a licensee as soon as a year after you're done. What was that like?
So yeah, the paralegal program at Fanshawe is a year, which is nice, and you get your placement all in one. I took a year off in between just to kind of work and decide what I wanted to do. But going right into it, I feel like you still have that fresh knowledge from university. The year was a nice break though, because you spend 4 years in university and your brain is just turning into mush by the end of it. So when you get into college, I find it's a more specialized area because in university, you only take about half the courses in what your area or in what your specialty is. So it was nice that every single course in college was related to the law. And I loved the criminology courses, but the paralegal program was centered exactly to what I enjoy. So it made it so much more engaging and so much more fun. But it was something that they did a career fair at my university every single year. And you go to the law school tables, you don't go to the paralegal tables, and you don't look into it quite as much. And it wasn't until I sat down with an advisor at university and she's like, hey, like if you don't want to do 4 more years, then you can do this. And another thing that kind of pushed me in the Fanshawe was that not all of my courses, but some of them account for almost a full year of law school. So if you go to law school, you have 1 less year to do, and then you have all the experience that you've already had as a paralegal that kind of helps give you the more knowledge if you ever want to do that road later on, which is nice.
And how would you compare the two, I guess, in terms of, I mean, you said it's more focused, right, with paralegal studies there. I mean, you only have a year to get into that, but again, I may have taken a couple of law classes, but I don't remember what certainly undergraduate law was like in a criminology program compared to obviously doing a paralegal studies where it's very focused. I mean, this month we're learning landlord and tenant and alternative dispute resolution. Next month we'll be on to like legal accounting and practice management. I mean, it's much more focused compared to more theoretical stuff you may have learned in criminology. So how would you compare students in undergrad versus your time in paralegal at Fanshawe? And is there anything that you need to switch up if you're doing a similar background or similar career path that you've done?
Mm-hmm. So Laurier offered a law and society course as well as a criminology course. I took the criminology course because it had more interesting classes and because there was more available. But I found that the law and society classes were more centered towards, the law school paralegal program avenue, whereas the criminology classes are more towards getting you into that master's program and more of like studying criminology for the end. Like it had some very interesting classes. I took a multiple murder class, a gangsters, Godfellas, and wise guys class. It was all very interesting and informative stuff, but I don't think it directly related to the stuff like ADR and landlord tenant board as much as the law and society did. So it was kind of hard to shift from learning in more of like, a philosophical way than going to like right direct into the laws and stuff like that. But it was nice that it had some overlap.
No, it's really interesting because on Friday I had a student who did the paralegal program at Seneca, and then she went into an undergraduate degree and then now just started law school. And then you've done it kind of the opposite of doing the undergraduate program and then going into a paralegal program. So it's kind of unique there. I mean, for any potential maybe high school students who are ever listening, that you can do things in any combination, and wherever you hopefully want to end up one day, you're going to be able to end up there, and there are different paths. And I think it's something really important there is that you can do an entire practice. I mean, what you're focusing in on right now, and you can do that from as little as 1 year at school there. So is there anything maybe because of that being a year, I mean, same with where I teach right now, it's a 1 year program, but you had to kind of learn afterwards or on your internship, and maybe you can share a little bit about what that internship experience was like and how it kind of prepared you now for going out on your own and practicing on your own.
Mm-hmm. So first, I think the small claims, as informative as it is, you can't get through everything. And I find my textbook is so helpful. Like from the start, I mean, in school we went from the start. You file the plaintiff's claim, you file the defendant's defense, and all that stuff. But something as simple as a demand letter, it's not something you cover in school, but it's so effective once you get your practice going. And even like notice on motions and all those things, something that you just can't cover all of that in school and get through it. So it's nice to have your textbook. I refer to mine almost every single day, and the rules of the small claims court online the best that I can. But in my placement, I was very lucky. I got to see a settlement conference. I got to see, a small claims court hearing. I got to go to many POAs, a couple landlord tenants. I actually got to go to a criminal matter, which was really cool. So if I can give any advice on getting a placement, try to get one in a firm with as many paralegals as you can, the more that you can learn, the more you can look at, even just looking at a SABS case or a WSIB case, something that it was nice for me to look at, to know that I'm not interested in it and that I don't want to sit there and read 500 pages of legal or of medical jargon, right? But some people really enjoy it and they really love it. So it's nice to have that ability. So if you did a placement in small claims and you get a job in SABS, you kind of don't know what you're getting yourself into. So the more you can bounce off of others, the better. And now I have a mentor in almost every single area because of my placement, which really helps.
And I guess as well, what do you think in terms of once COVID, hopefully sooner rather than later, kind of goes away, or we certainly open more things up in terms of practice? And do you think a lot of the virtual elements of meeting clients are going to stay? I remember you mentioned, like, even you can identify and verify someone now over the computer. I think you could always do that by getting someone to meet them and attest to everything that they did it. But it's certainly more challenging. I know one time I had a client from another city, and I had to find a lawyer or someone there to do that whole process. But a lot easier now to do it virtually. But is there anything that you're kind of seeing that maybe concerning about afterwards, that you're going to have to switch things up in terms of a practice, that people will want more face-to-face interaction? Or do you think people are now kind of acclimatized to having a client interview like this, where they go through their situation and be fine doing it over Zoom or another platform? Or do you think people are going to kind of want to return, certainly you can as an essential service, I believe, but to more in-person kind of meetings and discussions?
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to continue to run virtual, I'm pretty sure, after this is all over. That being said, I still do in person. Like, I use the law office in town, like I said, to meet clients. I have a client who would rather be in person with me for our Zoom hearings than being at two different places. So we meet in person for that. But I will always give them the choice to do it online. That way they're doing it, like when someone calls in and I have the time, I'll do my consultation right there with them, because they're calling in anyways. They want it to get looked after today. And most times if you push them off a little bit, then they might go just call someone else, right? It's this thing. They'll call 5 busy phone calls and keep going to different numbers until they get someone that goes through. And I think it helps me to serve more people. So when I was in school, we had some speakers come in and talk about like a come to you service, and they were from Kitchener and London, and they kind of drove all over Ontario to people's houses. And I was really going to do that, obviously, as a small town, because the amount of clients I get that actually live in Mitchell are a lot smaller than what I get in the 2 counties surrounding. So that's something that I've got to save some gas money and time on, is not doing the come to you service. I'll always offer it, like if someone would rather do it in person, but I will try my best to keep with the virtual and just keep growing from there. My goal is to have an office in 5 or 10 years, and it's nice to have that quick foot traffic coming in, especially for stuff like notaries and commissionings. But I get a lot of emails, even just people that want to meet me for 5 minutes to commission something or notarize it, and they're willing to drive, or I'll meet them halfway or something like that, which is really nice. And I find in the small town, people don't mind driving because you're used to living 20 minutes from the big city. Not that Stratford's overly big, but it's big for us. So they are willing to meet you halfway or do something like that, which is really nice.
Perfect. Now, say question another, maybe we look at this even in a small claim setting, but what happens if the tenant moves out and you don't know necessarily where they've moved to? How do you kind of locate someone to serve them, or should you wait before moving forward, or could you do like a Form 20? And what's the kind of limitation period on landlord-tenant matters? There's a bunch of questions in there, but in terms of landlord and tenant matters, do you have the same 2-year period after a tenant has moved out, or do you just have to go to small claims, I think, as you had mentioned before?
So that's a tricky one, because right now there's really no time limits on anything. Obviously, once COVID's over, that will all change. Another nice thing about small town is everyone knows everything about everyone. So if someone moves, there's a good chance that someone's told the landlord. And I get that all the time. And they say, oh, they've moved out. And I say, oh, do you know where they live? Yep, this person told me where this, not as prevalent in Toronto and Kitchener. If someone moves out, the neighbors aren't going to know where they went to. But yeah, it's difficult to find them where they go, but you can serve people on emails now, which, I mean, I'm sure you could before, but it's more acceptable now. Like I can serve a plaintiff's claim to someone via email, which is something you could never do before COVID. So serving them court files via email, even if you don't have their address, is still acceptable, which makes things a lot easier when you can't find them.
Perfect. So thank you so much, Hayley, for taking the time here and joining us, sharing about your practice and your experiences. And I think, again, something for my students to certainly relate to is being able to start your own practice. I mean, a couple of years after finishing your program and being able to do very innovative Instagram posts and get a lot of digital presence there. And I think the virtual offices are, I mean, obviously a good way to keep costs down, but as well have a good presence and being able to do things. Have you found, again, maybe you can share any final words of wisdom here with my student, but you found in terms of navigating working from home with everything, I think I heard a dog at one point and probably, I don't know, the family and everything there. How have you found kind of managing all of that? And any advice you have, final words for my students about succeeding and thriving in these uncertain times and getting ready to start their own practices maybe one day or working in a firm?
Mm-hmm. So for advice, if you want to do it and working for yourself is something that you want to do, then it's definitely worth looking into. In my small business course, we had to do like I can't remember the name of it, like a small business presentation. So if I were to go to a bank, I would need to know all of the information, like the census population, age group, how many are in my area, all that stuff. So if opening a practice is something you want to do, I would do as much research as possible and make sure that, there's not 20 paralegals in your area offering small claims court if that's something you want to do, right? And just keep your presence as much as you can online, keep giving information to others, keep helping others. There's a lawyers in London who does a free legal moment on the radio once a week, and they will get people asking questions and they'll answer them, and everyone knows that lawyer's name because they are giving that free 1 minute a week, to other people. So give as much I don't want to say legal advice, but legal help as you can. So let people know about contracts, let people know about who holds the burden, all of those things. And if you ever need any questions or help, please feel free to reach out when you're starting up, because there's little tidbits that you don't think about that you just learn on the process on the way. And don't forget to have fun, because you're doing this amazing thing all by yourself, and you get to take credit for being awesome at it. So that's great.
Perfect. So thanks again, Hayley. I wish you all the best, and you can certainly connect with her on Instagram. I believe it's at Small Town Paralegal. And thanks for everyone for tuning in there, as we've now gone into the 300s here of different guests we've had here in our program. So again, make sure you connect with people, get their different perspectives, and certainly reach out to people like Hayley if you want to do some more landlord tenant work, and she can provide you some more guidance and advice. Or if you're in a small town and want to start up a practice, I know I have a few students kind of who are looking at similar situations, and certainly can provide you with that guidance and support. So all the best, Hayley, in all these times there. And thanks for everyone for tuning in, and see you again tomorrow at 5 o'clock. Take care.
Thank you so much for having me. Bye.
Thank you so much, Hayley. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Thank you, you too. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.